Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 233. Today we preempt our deep dive into primitive religions and bring you an interview with Matthew and Tim Bannock. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now it's time to heat up the forge,
break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Matthew Bannock is a world builder, writer, and award-winning game designer. Indie style, of course. And he's the creator of Descriptors, which is much beloved here thanks to our Wine Steward stories in the World Builders Anvil. We've also co-GMed a GUPRS campaign that lasted for years and have played in many games together. He's a good idea. He's the guy I go to for monster talk and for brainstorming and fleshing out creative ideas. Tim Bannock, who I always knew as a player, that guy who kind of came along as the fighter just to die to help protect my friends. He's grown into an indie module developer and creates GM screens as well for more old school style role-playing properties. He's a proprietor of neuronphaser and the creator of many useful tools for gamemasters. All right, everyone, I'd like to welcome you to the show. Michael and I are very excited to be here with Tim and Matthew, who are unliving back from their deaths as vampires here to the world. And I'd really like to say hello to both of you guys. Is there anything really important that you'd like to make sure people know about as we get started?
Welcome to the show, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead. I think the main thing we want people to know about is this adventure that we put out together. We co-wrote an adventure that is now available on drivethrurpg.com called The Darkness Beneath Dalentown, and I'm sure we'll talk plenty more about it as we go on. But it's kind of like, in a way, it's almost 30 years in the making because Matt was the one who brought me into role-playing games when I was, I think, just about 5. They probably just needed like an extra fighter to die on some dungeon run. And I was like, dice. So, yep. And so kind of, all that time later, I've been publishing adventures on the Dungeon Masters Guild, and we finally got in touch and decided to do an old school module. So it's written for Swords and Wizardry, which is kind of a retro clone of OD&D. And we started with some mixture of OD&D, BX, AD&D, probably all thrown together. So that's pretty much it. This is our module that we wrote together and released, and it's selling well right now on DriveThru.
Now, is OD&D like the red box stuff? Is that what they're calling OD&D? What the heck is that?
No. So Swords and Wizardry is specifically a retro clone of 1974 D&D, I want to say it is. So it's like the old white box, plus the supplements, the supplement one, Greyhawk and Blackmore and those things. So it's going back a ways. Now they've made like little tweaks and brought in some of the stuff that showed up in I think it's BECMI, which is the red box. Some of the advances there. But it's like ultra simple. There's only the 4 classes and a couple races kind of thing.
So it's built for the numbers from that system setup?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so the idea is that this adventure was released just as in the Swords and Wizardry OD&D form. Although it's worth mentioning that we will eventually have conversions for it for 5th edition D&D, for Descriptors, which is a role-playing game that Matt has written on his own.
We have played that on the show.
I'd say you guys know it well. So we'll have that, and then we're thinking about Pathfinder, although they just announced their 2nd edition, so to be determined on where we'll go with that. And I also do work for another system called Cortex, which was used to power Smallville, Firefly, Marvel Heroic, and a few other kind of licensed games for a while. They're now kind of releasing it to the public to create your own stuff with it. And I've done some stuff. I did a zombie apocalypse RPG with it. So I want to do a version of this adventure for that as well.
Pathfinder seems really popular these days. At least that's what I get from our sister show, Seize the GM. They're very, very, fond of Pathfinder.
I like to think of them more as cousins, but that's just me. Okay, now moving on.
We'll skip that.
So not like a sister show, but like a cousin show.
Yeah.
Like it's like a sister cousin show.
No, not sister cousin.
Oh, okay.
We're leaving
that. That's something completely different. Yeah,
completely different. Okay,
but isn't it always time for something completely different?
Now, Tim, do you feel orc or elf today?
I feel orc today, and I'll say this quickly. There's this role playing game and board game war games that came out by this company called Rackham, a French company that made Confrontation, Nemesis, and a few others. And so when I visualize orcs, I visualize the orcs from that world, and they're this kind of like shamanistic tribal society. They're hated and feared by everyone because they were created for war, like orcs often are in lots of fantasy. But these guys have since kind of made this turn to become more of like a family, tribal-oriented society that actually has this ideal of peace with the world around them, but they're still a warlike people. So there's this conflict between them. So I feel orc in that way because I love this whole idea of family. That also goes to the fact that Matt and I are family. So we, wrote this venture together.
Aww.
Like a family of orcs. Okay, Matthew, orc or elf?
Actually, I'm going to ruin your format and say angry half elf.
Okay.
So not quite orcish level of aggression, but maybe with that little bit of elvish haughtiness.
Oh, so like the merge, the best of the both is what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're somewhere right in the middle, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
What's got your haughtiness up in an ire today?
Well, now I'm doing an interview for a product we released. Yes, I am that good. Why? Thank you for asking.
I see Matt is just as humble as we are.
Yeah, I am so humble. It is one of my better traits, in fact.
I'm always saying if it wasn't for my lack of humility, I'd be perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that does lead us right into our next question, your perfection there. As why don't you tell us a little bit about your latest work? What do people need to know about? What's cool about it?
Matt?
Okay, well, so with this adventure, I was inspired by a concept of taking a town that's just starting to grow. This is for me something that's really ripe for adventure. You take a town that's not too big, but it's in the process of getting more people. It's developing. It's starting to hop, and now there's a threat. A sewer's getting set up, a wall gets knocked down, and turns out there's dwarven ruins. Without giving too much away, there's going to be some fun backstory in dealing with what happened, why this isn't a thriving dwarven city, why it's in ruins, and what the fallout of that is. And slight spoiler, slimes. So slimes were very important to this. And Tim had a field day with the variety of slimes that one could bring in. I had actually forgotten a few of the types that he had brought in. So it actually is more diverse in the combat than I even expected it to be, which was a nice surprise.
Now, are slimes in this setup, are they creatures or are they races?
Oh, they're monsters. Yeah, there's
monsters.
Yeah, that. I mean, like Matt hints at, there's definitely this. There's a cool backstory to why there's all these slimes and stuff like that. And there's not only slimes. there's more stuff than that going on. But yeah, slimes are definitely kind of like a symptom of a much bigger issue. And I mean, slimes work really well as that because they feel like a disease, you know, or like a growth. And so that's kind of the theme I ran with.
Oh,
I hate to ask, going too deep here. Let me know if this is just slimes or oozes included.
No, so I tried to hit every single version of them. Like we started with the word ooze, and I found let's see, there's mustards, there's jellies. So you got your food groups. There's
puddings. Don't forget puddings.
Oh, puddings. There's puddings.
Puddings. Yes. Sorry. That one of the key food groups is dessert.
Exactly.
Is there really a pudding creature?
Oh yeah.
Black
More
pudding.
than one.
More than one. Well, you know, vanilla and chocolate. You know.
Yeah, I'm surprised we didn't work in more flavors actually, but yeah. So there's this great variety of slimy creatures, and then there's the other stuff going on behind them. So there's that too.
Excellent. So, and this is really for both of you. So obviously, whenever you're putting a module together, there's world building elements going on. So when you guys are putting the story together, how do you connect the storytelling and the world building?
Tim, I feel like that one's more your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's because so Matt gave me like this basically like the elevator pitch plus like this great kind of like log line of here's what the different levels can be, and then I kind of pulled some more of what I wanted into it. And so to answer your question, how do you connect the world building back to the story? So Matt really provided the story. The core of the story is what Matt provided. And then I got to kind of world build on top of the story. To connect it back, I actually used a design that they're actually called principles, and it is a principle from this game Dungeon World. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a somewhat modern RPG that really harkens back to OD&D, but with really modern design ideas. And one of the things they do is they talk about principles, and there's this specific principle of, I have it right here to get it exactly right. Draw maps, leave blanks. So when Matt gave me his core story and I built all this stuff on top of it, I then kind of re-looked at it before I even showed him what I was coming up with, and I subtracted. I took stuff out. And the idea being that if you have these blank pieces on the maps, whether it's the town, Matt mentioned that it's this developing town, it's not a huge sprawling city where everything is detailed. And then the dungeon maps have all these blank rooms. The idea there was that, the dungeon masters and the people reading this adventure are going to get inspired by the story, and then they're going to see the holes in the world, and they're going to be able to build on top of that. And we give them several tools to do that too. It's not like we just said nothing. Right. One of the tools we gave them, just to call one out specifically, is that part of this adventure is set in this kind of arcane library that the dwarves had, and so I created an entire appendix of books that you might find in this library. Some are magical, some are cursed, some are trapped, and some just have setting details and nothing more. And you can either randomly roll them. There's also a system to place them very specifically throughout the library in different rooms. But I didn't just say, hey, these books are here. I gave the tools for the DM to take all these different things and place them how they want. So they get to build the world that they want in this adventure.
That's actually really awesome. I remember one of the big issues I always had in the older days when I actually used other people's like modules to tell stories in would be inevitably another player, or the later it went on, multiple players would have copies of the damn module. And, and then you're sitting there and it's like, okay, yeah, we walk into the room and they just kind of haphazardly going through stuff. Then all of a sudden they stop and they're searching for traps. You're like, oh, come on, really?
Well, see that harkens back to one of my old adages about when you're building anything, especially for a tabletop role-playing game. All of the modules, all of the books are just guides.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know where to draw a line and let the guide stop and let you begin, especially in the creation aspect. So if there's maps to any given thing, you got to, especially, I mean, Tim's example is perfect where, or Jeff's example is perfect, whereas if they can get the same guide and know how everything's supposed to be laid out, well, of course, you got to change it up. Switch up gears and put a different creature. Like, okay, fine, you guys can rush in there knowing there's a bunch of kobolds, but today there happens to be a beholder.
Right. That's going to change the game entirely.
Yeah. Like, whoa, that's not what I meant. Let's back up, guys.
But that also kind of reminds me back years ago when Matthew and Tim played Vampire with me. By that time, if you had purchased the Book of Milwaukee, which is what I based the game was the city it was based out of, people, you could go through there like, half the characters are dead in here, or are you sure this is the same city? Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and that was one fun thing with having the library there. So let's say, there are things unique to the dwarves in your setting. By all means, toss a book in there. Mm-hmm. Here's their history. Here's some genealogy. Here's something that, hints back to your world, whatever that world is.
Yeah. So the cool thing is, it's like, it's world agnostic, so you can drop it in somewhere. But for like when you talk about an old race that is maybe not even existing anymore, I don't want to know because that might be story important. But I can insert in, and there's this new detail that pops up of something at least that's gone by, but it's a world building element that can be inserted into someone else's world, but it can be fleshed over to feel similar.
Absolutely. And even in designed worlds, like I wanted this to feel like, oh wow, you know what? This could be really fun in Dragonlance. And then someone else take a look at the exact same thing and go, oh my gosh, how cool would this be in Ravenloft? Mm-hmm. I want people to be able to fit it in to even wildly divergent ideas and work with it.
What got you guys inspired in the first place to say, hey, you know what, let's create our own module?
Honestly, illness. I have been out of work for some time with a number of medical issues, and I'm trying to find a niche, trying to find things to do. And Tim brought up that he had been working with module creation and writing. And when we started talking about collaboration, it turns out that I'm really good for ideas, but actually fleshing everything out, actually putting all the finishing touches, that's where I'm weak. Well, he's great with fleshing everything out, but sometimes gets writer's block. So working together, that was amazing.
Yeah. And I'll definitely, I can speak to Matthew's skills. I don't know how many hours we spent between us brainstorming our own worlds back and forth.
Oh my gosh.
And if you ever get a chance to do it with another world builder, it is a must do. Let's see. Okay. So we'll start with Matthew here, since you're so much older than everyone here, except for me. Except for me.
Yeah, that feels good.
He's not so much older. I think the three of us are just older than Tim.
Get over here so I can beat you with my cane.
When Matt was talking about his illness, he meant that he was 170 years old. So he still look good.
Yeah, my cane's in the other room, and I thought I might have had to use it today. I'm not kidding.
I've learned to levitate.
Yeah.
So Matthew, why don't you tell us, I know you've been doing this for a long time. When did you know that you loved world building? What was that moment? You might not even know it was world building, but what was that moment where it really started for you?
I don't know if I remember the exact moment. When I was a kid, you would talk about people who have imaginary friends. I had imaginary cities.
Mm-hmm.
I was always an avid reader for as long as I can remember. And yeah, when I would daydream, it wasn't just, I'm talking to my friend Steve. No, I would daydream that here I am in this castle with 30 people, and I could walk up and talk to any of those people and get their backstory, find out who they've been talking to, and that was just the way my imagination liked to express itself, and I loved telling stories and telling tall tales, even as a kid.
Yeah, you were quite a liar from what I was told. Let me just reiterate, Matt and I are friends going long back.
And that's a compliment on this show, because one of the show's old adages is, I'm a fiction writer, I lie.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I lie like a freaking dog.
And Tim, for you, same question. When did you know you had a love for the world building side of it?
It's a really good question, and my answer actually comes way later in my life than I think most world builders would admit to, in a way. I mentioned earlier that Matt brought me in when I was 5, to D&D. So like I was world building and playing role playing games, world building at least insofar as my character backstory from that point. So I never thought about it. I didn't become analytical about this stuff until way later in life, really until I got onto like forums talking about D&D in like the early 2000s, because then I started to self-reflect and be like, oh, like this is a bigger thing. And so to answer the question, it was really when playing Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, and I know I'm going to get skewered online if enough people listen to this part, because a lot of people did not like 4th edition, but me and my friends, we wanted to play test the system when it first came out because it was so different from all the other versions of D&D. And so I was like, okay, we're going to make this campaign where you're going to level up once or twice a session. And so we're going to get through all 30 levels of play, because there's 30 levels, not 20 in that edition, for no real reason. And so we're like, we're going to play past all these levels. And so you're going to have basically like 1 or 2 encounters, and it's always going to be a boss fight at the end of every level, and then you level up. And the story I came up with to make that work and be plausible, rather than just a bunch of fights, make it
rather
a story
than
around
Diablo?
it. Exactly. Yeah. And it could very easily.
I was about to say, it's very, very video gamey.
Yeah. And it absolutely was. And so is the system, which is why I got a lot of flack. But so I came up with the story where the player characters were the spirits of the dragon angels of the good dragon goddess. She had been defeated because she was a dual god. So there's an evil, obviously male version, who defeated her, killed her, and sent these angels to the underworld and was like, you guys are done. I've taken over. So the players don't know any of this. They wake up as their characters with amnesia. They meet this ghost of this little girl, and she can only interact with them through conversation. She's not a Mary Sue NPC who has all these stats and all this crap. And so the whole thing was, each boss fight they were having, each thing they were doing, without even knowing it, they're like advancing to different layers of the underworld in order to get resurrected by the end and be able to fight the dual version of the evil version of this dragon god, and get their goddess resurrected. And all of that to say, I had this very mechanical limitation on what we're doing, this play test of 30 levels, and came up with this great story, and my players really bought into it, and bought into this idea of just having characters with no backstory, didn't know why there's this little girl ghost following them around and kind of nagging them to do stuff. And it became this epic storyline of them resurrecting, their goddess and fighting back. And none of it followed any D&D lore. Because Tiamat is like the evil dragon god, whatever. So I had my own conceptions of God. Right. So I had my own conception of this underworld, and that conception came from all different mythology I researched. So each of their boss battles actually had a direct mirror to either Egyptian mythology or something. And it was all stuff I pulled in from years of having already told stories or reading stories and almost doing it second nature, not even really being aware of the world building that goes on in your head that Matt was more aware of, as a younger person. I didn't really realize this until much later in life. And then it kind of struck a chord. Long answer. Sorry.
Long answers are fine.
Long answers are fine. Now, what I want to know now is, what was that moment where you shifted? Because you guys have started sharing stuff. And I know in different ways, like Matt has released descriptors before. You've released other modules as well, I believe, from looking at your website. So I guess we'll start with Tim here. What was that moment where you said, I'm good enough to share this stuff. I can do this. What was that moment for you?
Honestly, so when Dungeon Masters Guild, which is dmsguild.com, got released, and they're like, hey, you can make homebrew D&D content and even make royalties off of it. First I saw money signs and was like, awesome, I can make money doing the stuff that I'm already doing. So there was that. You don't make enough money to make a living, so let me just kill that theory really quick. But what my first publication was this book called Hex Crawling, and it was all about taking old school OD&D style hex crawling adventures and doing it in 5th edition. The fulcrum of that entire book is around the random encounters and how to make them not just 1d4 ogres. How to tell a story in like one sentence for each encounter on a table. And so I put a ton of work into that side of it. And that's when, I partially did it because I wanted it to be out there and making money on the guild. But once I worked on it and found how inspired I was by so many stories that have been told in the past in D&D and how many adventures we had run, Matt had run us through and all this stuff, and be able to pull that all into this and find a way to tell it in a very simple, streamlined way. That really inspired me to do more and keep creating. And I think a lot of it was the feedback I got on it. Obviously, like a lot of people looked at it and said, "Hey, this is a really cool way of doing random encounter tables that aren't just 1d4 kobolds or some stupid thing like that. There's actually a story that you can find in it."
You got ice giants. Your next encounter, fire demons. Excellent.
And go. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's what so much of D&D, I think all the bad things about D&D or what people perceive as the bad things about D&D are exactly that. It's like you see a random encounter table and you're just like, oh God, now I have to do all this work of prepping. How does this encounter fit in my world? How does what are the consequences of this encounter that's real? Not just like the characters die. That's boring. Like how does this character's story work into it? And so those are the kind of things I think D&D sometimes wrongly gets accused of. But there is a certain amount of
game master, you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are tools that need to be out there in order to help newer players who aren't as experienced as folks like us to find those stories and build them into those things, make them really interesting.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.